This conceptualization of us as tonals, heart, mind, bodies, and souls, that are either in alignment or out of alignment, that are either pointed in one direction or pointed in 4 directions. So why does it matter? It matters in no small part because unlike popular belief, being successful does not make you happy. Being happy makes you successful. And this is very, very true in business. And this is true in every other enterprise. Furthermore, no matter what you have, nothing will bring you happiness until you're content with it. Now these sound like platitudes, this and that, and so on and so forth, but they have practical implications. They really do. Nothing will bring you happiness until you're content with it. So, happiness is good for business. Happy salespeople sell 50% more. Happy workers are more productive, substantially more productive. Of course, they get higher performance ratings. They're more liked by their peers. They get along better. They are better managers. They're better executives. They get better 360s, evaluations, etc. They have fewer sick days. They screw up less. They stay loyal to the enterprise longer, and they're much less likely to sue. So all of you HR managers out there, consider that when you're trying to just think of whether or not having a happy workplace is something you should strive for. They're also more creative. And when it comes to problems, you can't solve a problem if you're angry. You can't solve a problem if you're bitter. And this is one of the evolutionary rationales for happiness. This is one of the reasons why it was selected for and one of the reasons why it's important. If we want to solve problems, you can't do it if you're unhappy or you're angry or you're bitter. Unfortunately, in America, unhappiness is endemic. 50% of workers in America, almost 50%, more than 50% of workers describe themselves unhappy at work. That's not good news, folks. Half of Harvard students consider themselves depressed. Depression rates are 10 times higher than they were a year ago. Some of that might be more diagnosis, but the other part, frankly, there is more depression. There's more depression, and there's more, quote, ADHD. We live in a scatterbrained nation, which is going to be the name of a book I'm writing, I think, Scatterbrained Nation. The reason is that we're frenzied. We live these frenetic lives that are driven by only to one in an unbalanced way. And we aren't particularly preoccupied with happiness. We're more preoccupied with gross domestic product than we are with gross domestic well-being. And it's fascinating. If you look at political debates, it's never about, well, what's good for the people, what's good for our workers, what's good for our us as a society, as parents, as teachers, as adults, as colleagues, peers, etc. It's how can we increase our GNP? That's a problem. Part of the reason it's a problem is because we're not going to increase our productivity unless we're happy. That's the other thing. We waste so much time with bitterness and rancor and political infighting and so on and so forth that we aren't getting the job done. So in 1960, the average age of depression onset was around 30. Now it's more like 15. And this is very hard to believe, but it's very good data. About 8% of high school sophomores in, for example, Santa Clara County or in California in general, where I think it's around 7%, attempt suicide every year. These are our kids. We've got a lot of unhappy employees facing little fulfillment at work, little chances for advancement, little balance between the personal and work-life commitments, little recognition, long working hours, strained relationships at home because of tensions at work, lack of any say. Does any of this sound familiar? Internal politics and rigid company structures, bullying, and in reality, for some, very few promotional opportunities or opportunities for growth. So these are all very real things, I'm sad to say. Now, there's been good work done. And there's an interesting book by the CEO of Zappos, which was just recently acquired by Amazon, that happiness in the workplace actually is good business. It's very good business. You increase retention, you decrease turnover. Right there, you save a bundle. But what are the things that people need at work? They need an adequate salary as a baseline. They need to know that they're making a meaningful contribution. They need to be acknowledged. They need to be recognized. They need a chance for growth. They need opportunities for advancement. And a connection with the greater purpose of the organization and the belief that the organization has a greater purpose. This is what mission statements should be about. So if this is missing from the workplace, if any of these things are missing, you have less than an optimal workplace, and you're not producing. Let's just put it in plain old American terms, you're just not producing as well as you could be, or as efficiently or as effectively as you could be. Plus it's costing you a bundle, if you want to look at it in those terms instead of looking at it in more humanistic terms. So this thing about recognition is very, very important. You have to look at recognition broadly. It's not the same. You can't just slap somebody's photo on the Employee of the Month on the wall and call that recognition. You have to understand that every employee is individual. You have to take the time, managers, supervisors, executives, to get to know people individually, because different people have different things that drive them, that are important to them. Everybody's an individual. And you need to know what it is about that particular employee that's important to them. In this case, it's arugula, apparently. So if he was working for you, which would be an interesting thought experiment, you may want to bring him some arugula. Okay, so what are some of the most common misconception about happiness is that positive events will make you happy. And we have data on this. And I have personal experience on this because one of my patients won the lottery. It's amazing. Depressed guy, coming in, depressed. You know, he wins the lottery, all of a sudden overnight becomes a multi-millionaire. Still comes in. I thought that was cool. 3 months later, though, he's back to where he was. He's rich, which is nice, but he's still depressed. And there's plenty of data that shows the very same thing, that a lot of money or a lot of success, which you think will make you happy for good, actually gives you a moderate amount of happiness for a short period of time. Actually, the place I really learned this was in the Yucatan, where after my divorce, it was just horrible. I was totally depressed. I'm just wiped out. And my way of dealing with that was just by working. At the time I was in New England. And so I decided to go to anywhere where there was sun. So I went down to Cozumel. And I was just kind of in a daze, and I just booked whatever it was, or I didn't even know where I was going to land, but there's some place that looked like it would be good or whatever. So I ended up at this resort. And it wasn't a Club Med, but it was the same. I find out later it's the same principle, because you had all these beads, and that you use for your drinks and for your food, etc., etc. Actually, it was a tennis thing. I don't know why I was there, since I don't play that much. I don't play tennis, but I was at some tennis club resort in the Caribbean. And what I noticed a couple of things. The first turning point was when I was standing in line. Here I am, I'm white as a sheet, wearing this Hawaiian shirt, in line at the, with all these tourists at this resort, everybody trying to have a good time, and I'm waiting my turn in line with my beads here. I've never done that before. I used beads for money, but I'm really, really, really depressed. And in front of me, there's this woman. And on the back of her t-shirt, it says, "Triumph and disaster. I'll treat both imposters just the same." Mark Twain. And I saw that, and it was like, you ever had one of those moments where like, wow, that's it. And so I had this huge like epiphany. Triumph and disaster, I'll treat both moments both just the same. And it was like a bolt of lightning that hit me. So I tapped her on the shoulder and I said, where did you get that t-shirt? She says, why? I said, because of what it says on the back. She goes, it says something on the back? So that was the beginning of beginning to understand a few things. And then I noticed something else. Here were all these wealthy Americans primarily, desperately trying to have a good time. They wanted to get their money's worth, and they were doing their best. And they'd saved up for these vacations, and there was this and that, and all these expectations, etc. And they were partying and trying to have a good. You could tell how hard they were trying to have a good time, but you could also see how often it was failing, because they would get in fights with each other. These couples that had come down for the romantic thing that they'd been waiting for God knows how long or whatever. They were just trying to cram all this happiness in there. And where I noticed it the most was I went out on a boat. And in the Yucatan, the Yucatan has this extraordinary indigenous population, descended from the Maya. And they're kind of short, kind of dark, but they're the happiest people that I know of, that I've encountered anywhere in the world. It's extraordinary. And what I noticed was that they were the ones that were doing the work, the grunt work on the boats. They were like scaling the fish. They were like waiting on the tourists. They were, laughing and joking with each other in Spanish. And they were doing all the grunt work, but they were having the time of their lives at work. And the tourists were there doing their damnedest to try and have a good time, but they couldn't. They just didn't. They were trying in the wrong way. What these men and women from the Yucatan seemed to have was this appreciation for the little things, the beautiful climate, the beautiful ocean. They love Cozumel. They love that part of the world is beautiful, and they were just content with what they had. And so what I learned then, and boy, I needed to learn it too, was that happiness was not necessarily something that you could just take for granted, or you could just pay for, or you could just fly to. So if you look at the scientific literature on happiness, what we find is that some people are temperamentally more happy, like the descendants of the Maya in the Yucatan. And so that set point does account, and we all know people that are temperamentally, they're just happier. The glass is half full, the sun is always shining, and people who are the other way around. But that only accounts for about 50%. The bulk of it can be changed. And that can be changed by changing your circumstances, changing your intent. That's a big, important word, intent. And intentional activities. And that's what I want to talk about today, is how you can change your intent. And how if you change your intent to say, something, I might as well be happy. Why not? I'll just make it just like a work project. I can be happy, and set about doing it, because we know what the ingredients are. And we know what happy people are like. They often help without being asked. But we have scientific correlation data here. They devoted a great deal of time to their relationships. They express gratitude frequently. Gratitude is a cause of happiness, not an effect. A very amazing and robust scientific finding. It's a cause of it. They live in the present. They relish the small things in life, having friends on the boat with you, scaling fish. They have purpose, they're committed to goals, they aren't self-important. They look at problems differently, this is a special kind of resilience. And one, if nothing else, and you know what I'm saying is true, as people grow old, they grow old in two directions. They either become more serene and more happy, or they become bitter. And you can choose which one you're going to be. And for the sake, even if you don't care about yourself, for the sake of your kids and your grandkids, for God's sake, think about the possibility of being happy instead of being bitter as an old person. There's nothing quite as tragic as a bitter old person. So, I can't talk about happiness without also mentioning joy. Joy is something else, and I think you should aspire to it, but it's not something as straightforward. The search for authentic joy is a prize beyond human wealth, honor, or pleasure. This is Cicero. And be joyful in all things, Martin Luther. So how is joy different than happiness? Unlike happiness, joy is not influenced by external events. There's no satiation of joy. Joy, you don't run out of it or develop a tolerance to it. It's a stage of development in the most formal and exquisite constructions of human development. The stage of joy is a stage. It's not a state of mind. It's a stage of development. It can't occur if your tonal is all out of whack. If your mind's going that way and your heart's going this way and God knows what you're doing with your body or whatever, you can't be experiencing joy. You have to be aligned with a purpose. And it does require, ultimately, a transcendence of the self. There are moments of joy, and the one that comes to mind at the moment is I have a good friend, a dear friend whose wife died. I'm sorry to say, and he had been going to the opera for years and years and years with her, and he didn't have anybody to go with anymore. So he took me to an opera, a Philip Glass opera. I don't know, those of you who are familiar with Philip Glass. At any rate, I was virtually on the second row. I mean, he had fantastic seats, overlooking the string section. And Philip Glass, his music can be very, very difficult and very, very fast and very, very rigorous. And I was watching these cello players, and they're playing this particular movement. It's building up to a crescendo, and there's like 4 of them just like playing, and they're totally, totally, totally concentrated and into it, and they're moving in perfect synchrony, and you can watch them turn the pages, and the music is building up and up and up and up, and they're just, these guys are world-class cello players, and this thing's building up, and then I'm watching them because it's mesmerizing to see these musicians, and then there's this moment when one of them turns this way to just glance at the one on his right, and the one on the right looks over him at the left, and they just make this momentary contact. It's like, this is it. This is what we live for. And what they were giving to us, and what they were giving to themselves, and what they had created, the power of this joy, this alignment. There was no question. There was no self there. If they thought for 1 second about themselves, they'd lose their place. And we see this in peak performance of athletes and of creative people and so on and so forth. That zone, that place where your self just drops away. The self is not there. And that transcendence of the self can be a stage of development. And it's beyond happiness. Now it has, basically, there are some things about joy that are different. You have to be in the present. It can't occur in the future, and it can't occur in the past. It requires an openness. You have to be open to joy. You can't clench your fist around it. Joy always is accompanied with gratitude. Gratitude is a sister of joy. It's interesting because for happiness, gratitude is a cause of happiness, not an effect of happiness. It's incredible. And so is kindness, by the way. We've done, studies. There's a whole field now, positive psychology, where they're doing studies and they're having people do different stuff and seeing what causes and what are the results. And a lot of our thinking has been backwards on this stuff. And then, of course, there's self-transcendence. And then it would be disingenuous of me to tell you that it didn't involve also an element of grace. Now, I'm going to leave it to you to define grace, because I'm in a public forum, and it's not my business anyway to tell you about those kinds of things. But there is an element of grace involved. But you have to be open to it. If you're not, you'll miss it. And people miss it all the time. So joy, like love, can be difficult to bear sometimes. People cry, weep with joy. It always involves something outside the self. It's always new, it's always fresh, it's always in the moment. It's actually, you can see it in children. You can see it, actually, I saw an interesting example. I was at a dog park, and there were all these, it was a rich people's dog park, and they had all their dogs on, their expensive dogs on these expensive leashes, and they were all well-trained, and all the adults had plastic gloves and plastic bags and All the dogs were sitting there, well behaved, etc., except for this one dog that everybody was complaining about. I said, you know, somebody needs to put a leash on that. There was a Labrador Retriever, and these, you know, it's a 1.5-year-old puppy. And these neighborhood kids were throwing a tennis ball, and that Labrador Retriever was just boom, 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 and just jumping up and catching that ball perfectly. And the kids were completely there. The dog was completely there. It was just so beautiful to see this animal doing what it was designed to do, and this incredible joy in this dog and these kids playing. And it was, I can't tell you what, I was like, my mouth was dropping. And so I turned, I was going to say something, and they were saying, somebody needs to put a leash on that dog. And how often do we do that to ourselves in life? Put a leash on ourselves when perhaps what we should do is do what comes naturally. This is an example of joy of reunion. This is a young girl whose father has returned from Iraq. I just want you to pay attention to the facial expression there. And there are evolutionary reasons why, whoa, there's a drop off here and I almost became unjoyful. There's an evolutionary rationale why joy is important, and it has to do with reunion with or union with. And those of you who know the meaning of the word yoga and will understand more of what I'm saying here, but just the reunion with your caretaker or the person that offers you protection or nourishment, there's a reason why that would be selected for evolutionarily. For those of you who need evolutionary biology as a rationale for being happy and joyful. And then it has its roots in play. Remember that peekaboo, peekaboo? You know, this brain development stuff. You know, we talked about childhood play, but we didn't drill down too much on how important it is for brain development. We won't talk about that today. I will mention another theory called the broaden and build theory, which is that basically the reason it's selected for, happiness and well-being are selected for, is because in this situation, you're more creative at solving problems. So this has direct implications for the workplace, right? So those higher animals, primates and humans that could solve problems were more successful. And part of the reason they were able to do that was because they weren't afraid all the time and they weren't angry all the time. Because if you're in fight or flight, you can't solve problems. You're too wrapped around the axle. In the Tao Te Ching, this ancient Chinese exquisite text, it's called According with the Way. And there's a sublime attunement, there's no effort, there's no struggle, and there's no artifice. It's being there in the moment, totally engaged, totally attuned, totally aligned. Try it. You know what I'm talking about, and it's not an experience; it's alien, right? You've all had it in your own way, but the thing is, you can consciously cultivate it. According to Meister Eckhart, if gratitude is your only prayer, that should be sufficient. It's interesting; he uses this as a prayer, and I've mentioned repeatedly how gratitude turns out from the scientific data is a cause of happiness, not an effect. So it's actually just saying and feeling or expressing your gratitude actually makes you feel better. Strange, but true. So gratitude, some people have a gratitude attitude, and those people tend to be happier. It includes wanting what you have. Just that statement. To be able to say, I want what I have. Not I want to get this, or I have to have this in order to be happy, or whatever, but wanting what you already have. Being grateful for that is a long way towards this goal. Here I say gratitude is the brother of happiness, so I guess it's the brother and the sister of happiness. At any rate, they're very closely related. So now, a bit more about the heart. I'm going to venture into territory that is perilous. I'm going to talk about relationships, I'm going to talk about love. Either one of these topics can be the subject of encyclopedias, let alone, our talks or whatever. But One of the biggest mistakes you could make logically is to think that you exist independently. You don't. There is nothing in this cosmos that exists independently. Everything is interdependently related, and more so than you can possibly imagine. The Buddhists, who have spent quite a bit of time thinking about this, and now our modern physicists also have come to the same conclusion that these boundaries that we create in our minds between this and that, or that and this, are in fact just that, just constructs of the mind. I'm not going to go too far down into this, but what they call an interdependent origination, what that simply means is that there's nothing in this cosmos that exists independently. Not even your body is independent. If you think about it, you're exchanging molecules with the atmosphere. You're exchanging fluid with the earth. You're exchanging proteins and amino acids and things like that with what you eat, etc. And that's just the biological. And then we talk about human relationships, and human relationships are critically important for happiness. We're not designed to be solitary people. You go off, to Montana, live in your log cabin by yourself for a while, you end up like Ted Kaczynski or something, Not the kind of thing to be recommended. And even some of these guys who go up in the mountains and meditate for 3 or 4 years in their caves, they come out a little squirrely, frankly. So love, to be loved. And understand that's just the way things are. Try and go it alone in this world. See how far you get. So now love. Boldly go where no man has gone before. Okay. That's kind of what this feels like. I'm going to talk a little bit about love. And the reason I'm going to do it is because we use one word in English for love, but it's just a moment's reflection tells you that there's many different kinds of love, obviously. And here's some of the ones from the Greeks and the Romans. There's eros, which is passionate, ludus, which is playful and uncommitted. There's storge, which is friendship. Historically, this was filial love or familial love. There's pragma, calculating love, agape, the self-sacrificing love. This was characteristic of the early Christians. There's mania, obsessive love. How many of you remember the woman, the astronaut from Houston that was kind of in love with this guy in Tampa, I think he was?